Hello and welcome to this edition of Big Fish Small Pod. And as always, do not forget Big Fish Small Pod is presented by MPT College Consulting. You can check them out at mptcollegeconsulting.com. And Marlins fans, I just finished up draft weekend. I will be conducting a series on the Marlins draft prospects that they did select in the 2024 MLB draft. I'll be talking to reporters, members of the media, discussing players from their teams. And first up, from Fan Nation, from the Bleav Georgia Tech podcast, Caudell. Jackson, I appreciate your time to talk to me a little bit about Payton Green.
Hey, man, I appreciate you having me on. And, as a sign of respect, I didn't wear my Braves jersey today.
I appreciate it. That's perfect. Already great in my book. But with Payton Green, the Marlins taking him with the 184th overall pick in the draft, coming out of Georgia Tech. So tell us a little bit about Payton last season, because I know I just about him in the ACC and that conference as well with the stiff competition he also has to face.
So Georgia Tech was a really young team this past year, but Payton Green was one of the veterans. He transferred in from NC State and got off to a little bit of a slow start, but Tech's offense as a whole kind of like took off about mid-season, and they won like several ACC series down the stretch. He hit over, I think he wound up hitting 308 to end the season, 12 home runs. He was just really consistent every time at the plate and didn't make many mistakes on defense either. And like I said, the offense really started taking off at the end of the year. Good, consistent hitter at the plate. Doesn't make many mistakes on defense. And I still think he has his best baseball ahead of him because this was his first all-ACC season this year at Georgia Tech. He didn't do that at NC State. So I think, I don't know how long he's going to be in the minors. Like it sometimes that can be kind of hard to project, but I do think he'll be a very solid MLB player in the future.
Yeah, and with him, you mentioned his defense. Maybe a lot of people on Twitter and everything maybe showing that he has the potential to move to third base, and maybe not stick currently at shortstop. Just how would you look at his maybe defense, and maybe talk a little bit if you've seen his defensive plays last year at GT?
So I guess I'm slightly out of my depth here. I guess I could see him, making the transition over to third base. I think shortstop, he didn't do that. So like, I guess it's always can be tough to project, where guys can play in the majors, but I definitely think he can do it. Defensively, look, didn't commit many errors. That was a serious problem. I think that was one of the main reasons he was brought in, was because over the past couple of years, like Georgia Tech has just been one of the most mistake-ridden teams in the ACC, and Payton Green really cleaned that up, as well as being, really good behind the plate. So, like, I think he really does project pretty well, and I would argue maybe that's the most consistent part of his game, because, like I said, the offensive stuff kind of came on towards the middle of the season last year and kind of elevated and everything, but defensively, like, he's already pretty solid.
Yeah, and with Payton, just how was he maybe towards his teammates, the coaches, just to be around? What are the Marlins getting in terms of the person in Payton Green?
Absolutely perfect teammate. Like, being one of the veteran leaders on a young team, I don't think is ever easy. And like I said, Georgia Tech usually has a lot of guys in the draft. Like, Payton was one of the only guys I was like, well, he's definitely getting drafted. And then there just wasn't anybody else. So he kind of took that leadership upon himself and just did a fantastic job with it. Like, you won't read or you won't hear a bad word about this kid at all. And I think he's just a great addition to any clubhouse, dugout, wherever. Like, he's just great.
Yeah, and, with him there, just what in this season, what were some maybe standout moments from Payton that you saw that maybe Marlins fans something they could get used to going on in the future?
So I would say his performance in the NCAA tournament. So like I was saying earlier, Tech really came on towards the middle of the season, and they were a bubble team pretty much all season, and they kind of snuck in. Some people didn't think they should be in, but they got in. Took a really tough game on the chin against UNC Wilmington the first night there, and then he played two really great games the next day against Army, and then on Sunday against UNC Wilmington, and then was having a good game against Georgia. They wound up losing that game. I would say his performance is there, and just the ability to – I think that's where you saw the leadership kind of kick in and, like, take it upon himself. Like, hey, we're not going to go down quietly. We're going to keep persevering and pushing, because there were several times in both those games where they could have lost. He came up with some big moments. So I would say his performance there down the stretch of the season. It's hard to nail. He didn't hit up, really walk-offs, something like that. But I would just say, like, the leadership and the performance down the stretch was just awesome.
Yeah, and with Payne as well, how would you see him, maybe the strikeout numbers and his walks? How would you maybe see those, how they were at Georgia Tech? Did he really improve upon that as he progressed from North Carolina State to GT? And maybe how did those numbers look like while he was in the ACC?
So in terms of drawing walks and everything, like, Georgia Tech was one of the better teams. Actually, like, that was another thing the offense really cut down on, was strikeouts, and he was one of the better ones. I don't have the exact numbers right in front of me, but he was definitely one of the team leaders in that and in drawing walks. So as far as that goes, he doesn't swing it a lot. Now, I'll say this, like, and I guess this is for a lot of shortstops, I would say, like, there's not a ton of power. Like, I don't think he's ever going to hit 20 home runs in a season. Like, I would never expect that of him. But I still think that the rest of his all-around game is good. Like, the strikeouts are to a minimal. I think he will bat for a pretty good average for the most part.
Yeah, and, also coming from a completely different school and a rival at NC State, just for Payne, just what did he bring to the team maybe almost immediately? Just how did he improve upon that Georgia Tech team? Maybe something we can also see with the Marlins going to a new team and just helping out everyone else on it.
Well, like I was saying earlier, I think the defense is just something that translates just immediately. And, in previous years, they missed the tournament a couple of years ago. And like I was saying, strikeouts and defensive errors and just mental mistakes just killed them over and over and over again. And you could see, even during the rough patches in the season, like, okay, if they can correct these things, like, they're already so much better at these. And, like, he instantly brought that in and just, again, the leadership, and just changed a lot of things for him. And then, everything else kind of caught up to them, especially on the offensive side. And, it wound up being an all-ACC player.
Yeah, and, with that, you mentioned some of his, I don't want to say weaknesses, but going through those rough patches. When he did go through those rough patches, did you see him try to instantly maybe make those changes? And maybe how do you think he went about trying to change when he was in a rough patch or a rough stretch?
Well, and see, this is another good thing about Payton. He didn't panic. There's going to be stretches for every single baseball player, I guess maybe other than like one or two during the season, where it's just not clicking. And I think just staying patient through the process just goes to show his leadership and just his experience. Because, like, for a lot of the younger players, I think they did try to do a little too much at times, when they hit those patches. I think he just stayed consistent, stayed true to what he knew, and didn't panic at all.
Yeah, and with him as well, mentioning all this, for you, maybe, Jackson, when you see Payton Green and maybe you're talking to someone about it, just like myself, just someone who maybe not too much, what's one thing about him that if, people listening to this or on Twitter or whatnot that they have to take away from Payton Green? If you leave here with one thing, what does it have to be about?
I think it's just the character, the leadership, and just being an all-around good baseball player with still room to improve. You're like, man, if this guy keeps getting better at these things with the things he's already good at, like you're talking about a starter-level player at some point in the future. Like I said, I'm not the best at predicting or translating when guys, how long they need to take in the minor leagues, whatever. I would be pretty surprised if at some point, he didn't wind up playing in the majors here in a few years, just because of the things he's good at and the things, he got a lot better at last year.
Yeah. The last question I have for you, Jackson, when you were talking to the coaches or maybe the other media members, just what would they say about Payton maybe throughout the season when you would get those one-on-ones, and maybe how did he come across to just the other people, whether it's the locker room, the clubhouse, or just seemingly media coaches at all?
Always good to talk to. And I think it's just, whenever the offense was in a rut, you could always count on him to like, man, I'm glad Payton got that hit or something to get us going, or glad, Payton taught us this, or hey, Payton said this. Like, there was a lot of that. And I, again, just circle back to the leadership. And I think that I don't think there would be a media member that would disagree with that, or anybody that, covered the team or watched this season.
Very quick, small pod as always. Got to keep it to that. I want to appreciate you. Two things coming on very short notice, and not wearing the Braves gear you mentioned.
It was a little hard, but I gotta be relatable to people, and you invited me on, and I really appreciate you inviting me on. So it's maybe next time.
No, of course you're welcome on anytime to talk a little Payton Green or anything like that. Maybe Georgia Tech comes down to Miami, catch a game there. But I appreciate it, Jackson.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Have a good one.